We got a spot on your tour, and we were in a band called Fritz. And that was the first time that Lindsay and I ever had gone on the road or had ever been in a situation of a big...
This is before Fleetwood Mac.
This is 5 years before Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, wow.
And you were all there with your white blonde hair. And it was just fantastic. And Lindsay and I were like...
Stevie Nicks reveals that Leon Russell changed her life, and her confession may be the most moving story she has ever told.
I can remember at San Jose State walking through the campus in my one fantastic outfit that I bought at the Velvet Underground in downtown San Francisco. It was like silky bell bottoms and a silky top and really high heel shoes, kind of like the ones I'm wearing right now, and long hair, and carrying my Goya classical guitar and walking through and thinking to myself, do you all know who I am?
Long before the world knew her name, she was a penniless singer in a struggling band, opening his shows and standing in the dark each night to study the greatest showman she had ever seen. What she never expected was the cruel twist waiting, because by the time she finally thanked the man who shaped her destiny, he was old, frail, and forgotten by everyone. A few years later, he was gone, and Stevie was left carrying a debt that could never be repaid.
That's the one and only Stevie Nicks, whose songs have touched the lives of millions, both for her work with Fleetwood Mac and for her solo career.
You can't trick me into singing.
Yeah, totally, Stevie.
The girl at the side of the stage. Around 1970, long before the platinum records and the twirling shawls, Stevie Nicks was simply the girl singer in a struggling Bay Area band with one of the strangest names in rock, the Fritz Memorial Band. Music was already in her blood. Her grandfather had been a country singer, and she had been harmonizing with him since she was a little girl. She got her first guitar on her 16th birthday and wrote her first song that very night. Then, at a school gathering, she met a gorgeous young guitarist named Lindsey Buckingham, sang California Dreamin' with him in perfect harmony, and a couple of years later, he called and asked her to join his rock and roll band. For a few years, Fritz scraped out a living opening shows for the giants of the era, sharing stages with names like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Santana, and Ike and Tina Turner. Stevie was juggling college classes by day and long drives to rehearsal by night, chasing a dream on pure stubbornness. And then came the booking that would quietly change everything. A handful of shows that, as you are about to see, would secretly set Fleetwood Mac itself in motion. Fritz landed a short run of dates opening for Leon Russell, the piano man with the long hair, the top hat, and the voice like gravel soaked in gospel. Decades later, in a 1986 television interview in Australia, Stevie told the story herself, and her excitement had not dimmed one bit. As she remembered it, it was the only real little tour the band ever did, just a handful of shows in cities like Salt Lake City, San Diego, and Los Angeles, and she did not care what it took to be there. If I had to carry the piano, it didn't matter, she said. She was going. What she got in return was worth more than any paycheck. Night after night, Stevie planted herself at the side of the stage and simply watched. She watched the way Leon Russell walked out and owned a crowd without begging for its attention. She watched the way he sat at that piano like a preacher at a pulpit, building songs into thunderstorms, bending rock and roll, gospel and country into one wild sound that no one else on earth could make. She has said plainly that he was very much an influence on her, and you can draw a straight line from those nights at the edge of his stage to the magnetic performer she would one day become. For a young woman still years away from her own spotlight, it was a masterclass she never forgot. Most people in those crowds had no idea who the opening act even was. No one could have guessed that the unknown girl watching from the shadows would go on to become one of the most beloved singers in the history of rock and roll. But before she could become Stevie Nicks, she needed to see what greatness looked like up close. Leon Russell showed her. So who exactly was this bearded wizard who left such a mark on her? The master of space and time. To understand what Stevie saw from the side of that stage, you have to understand just how enormous Leon Russell was. Born Claude Russell Bridges in Oklahoma, he toured as a teenager with Jerry Lee Lewis before moving to Los Angeles, where he came up through the studio world as part of the legendary Wrecking Crew, the elite circle of session musicians who secretly played on many of the greatest records ever made. That was Leon on piano behind the Beach Boys, behind Frank Sinatra, behind the wall of sound productions of Phil Spector, behind hit after hit that carried other people's names. He co-wrote smashes for Gary Lewis and the Playboys before most fans had ever seen his face. When George Harrison praised Ike and Tina Turner's River Deep Mountain High as a perfect record, the piano on it belonged to Leon Russell. By the turn of the 70s, the sidemen had stepped into the spotlight, and for a brief, blazing moment, he was one of the biggest stars in the world. He built and led the horn-drenched touring circus behind Joe Cocker's famous Mad Dogs and Englishmen. He stole the show at George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh, sharing a stage with Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton, and somehow making the world watch him instead, turning a playful Coasters tune and the Rolling Stones' Jumpin' Jack Flash into one thunderous show-stealing medley. He wrote songs that became standards. A Song for You, a ballad so perfect it has been recorded hundreds of times across 4 decades, by everyone from Ray Charles to Willie Nelson to the Carpenters. This Masquerade, which won a Grammy for Record of the Year in George Benson's hands. Superstar, which became a smash for the Carpenters and later Luther Vandross. Delta Lady, which he handed to Joe Cocker. Fans called him the master of space and time. He filled arenas, released a triple live album, crossed over into country music under the playful alias Hank Wilson, and founded his own record label, which helped launch the careers of artists like Tom Petty and Phoebe Snow. He was mysterious, brilliant, and impossibly cool, the silver-maned figure behind dark sunglasses that a whole generation of musicians studied like scripture. Elton John has openly called him his idol and most important influence. This was the man who held a young Stevie Nicks spellbound, not a polished pop star, but a force of nature, a performer who blurred the line between a rock concert and a revival meeting. And here is what makes those few nights almost eerie in hindsight. While Stevie stood in the wings studying Leon Russell, someone else was standing in those same wings, and he was studying her. What he saw there was about to change music history. From his stage to hers. Here is the part of the story that most fans have never heard. That little tour with Leon Russell did not just inspire Stevie Nicks. It set off the exact chain of events that gave us Fleetwood Mac. Because the man watching from the wings of those very shows was a record producer named Keith Olsen, and as Stevie herself has explained, it was essentially on that short Leon Russell run that Olsen first took notice of her and Lindsey Buckingham. When Fritz finally fell apart, it was Olsen who drew the two young hopefuls south. At the beginning of 1972, Stevie and Lindsey packed up her Toyota and drove to Los Angeles to work with him, chasing the dream she had glimpsed from the side of Leon's stage. The grind that followed was brutal. Before the move, the two of them had spent months sneaking into a tiny room at Lindsey's father's coffee plant after the workers went home, recording demos all night long on a 4-track machine. In Los Angeles, they were broke, hopeful, and completely unknown. The result of all that work was the Buckingham Nicks album, a commercial flop that nevertheless changed music history. Because when Mick Fleetwood walked into Olsen's studio looking for a new guitarist, It was a Buckingham Nicks track that Olsen played him. Fleetwood wanted Lindsay. Lindsay refused to come without Stevie. On New Year's Eve of 1974, the two of them were invited to join Fleetwood Mac, and within months, the reborn band was on its way to becoming one of the biggest acts on the planet. And when Stevie finally stood on stages of her own, in front of 20, 30, 70,000 people, the education she received at those Leon Russell shows was written all over her performance. The command of the crowd, the sense of mystery, the refusal to simply sing songs when you could cast a spell instead. Leon had turned concerts into something closer to church, and Stevie, in her black chiffon and moonlight, built her own kind of temple on the same foundation. And she kept telling the story. Even in 1986, at the height of her fame, sitting for that interview on the other side of the world, the tale she reached for was the broke girl who would have carried Leon Russell's piano just for the chance to watch him play. She has never pretended otherwise. While the world assumed her heroes were all singers, Stevie has always pointed back to that bearded man at the piano as one of the artists who shaped her the most. Even her restlessness carries his fingerprint. Like Leon, she refused to stay inside one box, launching a solo career with Belladonna in 1981 while still holding her place in one of the world's biggest bands, writing constantly, duetting constantly, treating music as a calling rather than a career. Watching a man who could be a session player, a band leader, a songwriter, and a showman all at once taught a young singer that an artist never has to choose just one dream. But while her star kept rising through the 70s and 80s, something heartbreaking was happening to his. The ditch by the side of the highway. As Stevie Nicks became one of the most famous women in music, Leon Russell slowly slipped into the shadows. The hits dried up. The arenas became theaters, then clubs, then small rooms on endless highways. The man who had once commanded the concert for Bangladesh spent decades grinding out one-nighters in front of a few hundred loyal fans, recording albums mainly so he would have something new to sell at the merchandise table, their covers sometimes looking as if they had been thrown together on a laptop on the tour bus. A whole generation grew up never learning his name. It is one of the cruelest patterns in music. The pioneer forgotten while the people he inspired fill stadiums, and few artists ever lived it as completely as Leon Russell did. It took another superstar he had inspired to bring him back. In 2009, Elton John decided the world had forgotten the wrong man. Elton has said that hearing Leon's old records again after many years moved him to tears, and he picked up the phone and reached out to his old idol to record an album together. That record, The Union, released in 2010, returned Leon Russell to the charts and to the spotlight after decades in the wilderness. Those who saw him in his later years describe a haunting figure. He would sit stoically at the piano, silent and still behind the dark glasses and the great white beard, and then suddenly burst into song with all the old fluidity, as if no time had passed at all. The following year, Leon was finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, welcomed to the stage by Elton himself. And his acceptance speech contained one of the saddest, most unforgettable lines ever spoken on that stage. Elton, he said, had found him in a ditch by the side of the highway of life. Think about that. One of the most influential musicians of the 20th century, the man who helped shape Elton John, who helped shape Stevie Nicks, who played on records the whole world can sing by heart, describing his own life as a ditch by the side of the highway. Age and illness had bent his body. He walked with a cane, his hair and beard gone snow-white. Yet, behind the dark glasses, the genius remained, and the people he had lifted up along the way had not forgotten him. Which brings us to the moment this whole story has been building toward. because right in the middle of that late-life comeback, as cameras rolled on a documentary about the Union, a familiar face from his past came walking into the studio to find him. It was the girl from the side of the stage. The thank you that came just in time. In 2010, at the Village Studio in Los Angeles, where Elton John and Leon Russell were recording the Union, Stevie Nicks came to see the man who had changed her life. She was working on her own album, In Your Dreams, at the time. But this visit was not about business. It was about gratitude. Film cameras, there for a documentary about the album directed by Cameron Crowe, quietly captured the meeting, and fans can still find the footage today. It is a remarkable thing to watch. 2 lifetimes in music, folding back on themselves in a single room. Standing before the white-bearded legend, Stevie reached back 40 years and told him what those nights had meant to a broke young singer in a band called Fritz. "This was the big time to us," she told him, remembering how she and Lindsay had opened his shows when they were nobodies, with nothing but hope. She spoke with the reverence of a lifelong fan, one of the biggest stars on earth suddenly transformed back into the wide-eyed girl at the side of the stage. All the awards, all the fame, all the decades, none of it mattered in that room. In front of Leon Russell, Stevie Nicks was 22 years old again, and here is the tender, bitter-sweet part. Leon, by then old and frail, seemed a little vague about it all, as if those long-ago shows had faded into the fog of 1,000 nights on the road. And of course they had. To him, that tour had been just another few dates in a lifetime of them. He had no idea back then that he was changing anyone's life. He was just playing. That is the strange arithmetic of influence. The moments that mean everything to one person can pass entirely unnoticed by the other. But he received her thanks like the Southern gentleman he had always been, gracious, soft-spoken, and perhaps a little overwhelmed by the attention. And when Stevie said her goodbyes and slipped out of the room, Leon Russell did the most Leon Russell thing imaginable. He turned right back to the piano and started to play. It is hard to imagine a more perfect picture of who he was. The applause, the praise, the famous visitors, none of it ever mattered as much as the music itself. He did not linger in the moment or bask in the tribute. The song was always waiting. And though no one in that room could have known it, Stevie's thank you had arrived just in time. Goodbye to the master. Then, on November 13th, 2016, the music stopped. Leon Russell passed away in his sleep at his home in Nashville. He was 74 years old and had been recovering from heart surgery, still hoping to get back on the road to the fans who never stopped loving him. He had played on, in fact, almost to the very end, still taking the stage the way he had for 60 years. The tributes poured in from every corner of the music world, from the superstars he had influenced to the session players who had stood beside him, all mourning one of music's true originals. For Stevie Nicks, the loss carried a special weight. Leon Russell was woven into the very beginning of her story. He was the star whose stage she haunted as an unknown, the influence she carried into Fleetwood Mac, the living link between the dreaming girl she had been and the legend she became. She had watched him from the wings when no one knew her name, and she had returned, decades later, to thank him face to face while there was still time. So many of us never get that chance. Stevie took it, and because she did, there was nothing left unsaid between them. And in a strange, beautiful way, Leon Russell is still on stage every time Stevie Nicks performs. He is there, in the way she holds a crowd in the palm of her hand. He is there in the mystery she wraps around every song, in the sense that a concert can be something closer to a ceremony. The girl who once stood in the shadows studying the master of space and time grew up to cast spells of her own, and she has never stopped honoring the man who first showed her how it was done. That may be the real lesson hiding inside this story. The people who change our lives do not always know they are doing it. Leon Russell was simply being Leon Russell, show after show, unaware that a young woman standing quietly in the dark was deciding her entire future as she watched him play. He never asked to be anyone's hero. He just sat down at the piano, and destiny took care of the rest. Somewhere right now, at the side of some small stage, another dreamer may be watching another master, and the whole cycle may be quietly starting again. So now we want to hear from you. Did you know that the great Leon Russell played such a huge part in the making of Stevie Nicks? And is there someone who changed your life, who you still need to thank while you can? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.